Aldrin's here, so I'm going to turn over in a minute. I'm just going to talk about timing for 1 second. Obviously, the big discussion today is about the hotel permit. As is always the case when we're doing a vote at Borough Board, we have to be a little bit flexible in terms of when some of our council members join us so that we can actually take the vote. So we're going to kick it off with this discussion. We do have 2 presentations today that are terrific, so I'm hoping some people at least will be able to stay around even after the vote, or we may do it in between the vote if we don't have, the council members here when we're finished discussing. So a little bit of flexibility, and then I'm going to turn it over to Aldrin to start the meeting and Jim to lead the discussion on the hotel special permit.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to our Borough Board June meeting. The first order of business is a motion to adopt the June 28th, 2018 Borough Board minutes agenda. So moved by Jen, second by Ms. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes. The next order of business is the adoption of the May 17th, 2018 Borough Board minutes. We have a so moved. Second? Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next, we turn to Jim, correct? On the conversation on M1 Hotel Text Amendment, Borough Board discussion.
So I'm sure you're all aware, we have a referral period ending July 2nd on the M1 Hotel Text Amendment, which would create a special permit in M1 light manufacturing zoning districts for hotel use. So we're going to turn it over to the city planning to do a presentation, and people should, I know we got it out around 5 o'clock last night. That was the best we could do, right before
Actually, should we give people a little time to read it if they?
Well, that's what I was going to say. People should take a minute to look it over. If you haven't looked it over, and then after the presentation, you could have questions, and we'll have some discussion on the resolution. Just the title. Nothing substantive.
So we can just read one.
Yes, if you've already read it, the substance is identical. Another minute, and then we'll. Okay,
Where do you want?
wherever.
Okay.
Actually, Hector, where can he be seen from, or is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. My name is Barry Dinnerstein. I'm a planner with the New York City Department of City Planning, and I'm here to talk to you about the M1 Hotel Special Permit zoning tax that is before you today. The planner, Jackie Sun-Woo, actually she has the presentation, and she is, of course, trapped on the subway. You know, when I first started at city planning, people would like not show up at meetings or come late to meetings and say, oh, we've got a problem with the subway, and everyone would sort of nod and say, oh, okay. It's unfortunate that now we're back to that again, where, you know, people just get lost in the subway and delayed by hours trying to get here. But anyway, I'll try and do this about the presentation. Many of you have seen the presentation because our staff has come out to all the community boards and have actually shown you this presentation. So hopefully for many of you, you've seen the presentation. And we can, I guess, email it to you too if you'd like. So this came about because in a lot of districts around the city, we were seeing hotels being built on blocks where there were lots of conflicts with the adjacent land uses. And particularly in some of the more active industrial areas of the city, hotels were getting built on blocks where there was active industrial uses, a lot of truck traffic, people loading and unloading. In some cases, there might be like an open use, you know, automotive like storage and things. And there was a feeling on the part of the planning department that some of this use was incompatible, that we were creating conflicts between visitors and the existing industrial businesses. And we didn't want to see those conflicts. We wanted to try and manage those conflicts. We didn't want to hurt the industrial businesses. In some cases, we certainly felt that the hotel was totally appropriate where it was going. But in other cases, we sort of thought, this is not a good fit. This is not a good place to put visitors. People are unfamiliar with the area. And so we came to the conclusion that we thought that hotels should still be permitted in the M1 districts, but they should be subject to some sort of discretionary review where the community boards, the borough president, the city planning commission, and the city council would look at the hotel, look at the block, look at the surrounding area, and make a determination whether the hotel was appropriate, and maybe come up with some things to make the hotel appropriate. If maybe make it smaller, maybe make it face a different direction, or in other cases just decide the hotel was totally inappropriate. In Manhattan, where there's a lot more mix of uses, we sort of looked at what was going on with hotel development, and we saw a couple of things. First of all, because of the way the building's height and setback rules work, we got a lot of buildings that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. They were totally out of context with the surrounding area. You know, just sort of bizarre buildings sort of being plopped down in the middle of essentially semi-industrial commercial areas. And I know for a lot of communities there was a lot of concern about that. But also there was a lot of concern that certain areas were being turned into effectively tourist areas. And, you know, for some places maybe that's the right thing, but in a lot of places we sort of thought, well, maybe these communities don't really want to be, you know, tourist areas. We don't want everything to revolve around tourists. We want them to be sort of commercial. We want them to be service areas. And again, you know, our thought was, well, we're not saying that hotels are inappropriate. Hotels employ a lot of people. It generates a lot of jobs for the city. But we thought in these areas, well, maybe we should put them through some sort of public review where we can try and decide, does this building make sense at this location? And if it doesn't, you know, talk with the developer and sort of say, well, we have all these concerns, and then have them maybe redesign the building, redo it in a way that made it more compatible. And in the end, if they can't make the case that this makes sense at this location, then they would be denied in terms of going forward with the permit. So that was sort of our thinking. We put this into this text amendment, which is before you today. So on adoption of the text, what would happen is that anybody who wishes to build a hotel in an M1 district, and there are obviously many M1 districts around Manhattan, it would be subject to a special permit. Special permit is a ULURP-like action. People's eyes glaze over when you get into all the different things about ULURP, but basically the way it would work is for someone to come in and apply for an application. First, they'd have to do environmental review. Then once the environmental review was completed, it would then go to the relevant community boards as a standard type of ULURP, 60 days for the community board to review it, hold a public hearing, have a discussion with the developer about the project, then to the borough president for 30 days for the borough president to review the project, and then back to the planning commission for 60 days for the planning commission to review it and look at the project. And then this is where it gets a little bit complicated. At that point, the city council can review the project, but doesn't have to. So there's something called a call-up, which means that if the city council wants to review it, they can call up the item and they can review it. If they're comfortable with it, they can allow whatever the city planning commission decided to go forward. In most cases, the city council calls up the item and asserts jurisdiction. Occasionally, broad consensus, everyone is happy with the project, city council says we don't really need to get involved here, it's fine. But I would assume in most cases, if we have hotel projects, the city council will at least want to look at it before approving or denying the application.
I'm sorry, if they hold it up, is there a time limit?
Yes, so if the council calls it up, they get 50 days to review the project. If they modify, again, here we go with the craziness here, 50 days, if they modify it, it then goes back to city planning, the city planning commission for 15 days. The city planning commission is basically reviewing it to determine if the environmental review that was conducted is consistent with what the council did, which, I've been doing this for a long time. That's never really been an issue, but that's what the city charter says. So it goes back to the city planning commission. The city planning commission says, yes, the environmental review was consistent because, city council staff and city planning staff are talking. It's very unlikely that the city council would do something that was outside environmental review, but it comes back to city planning commission. City planning commission, of course, at that point can issue a finding and say, well, we don't think the council is doing the right thing here, or they've improved it, they can do that. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. It then goes back to the council for final approval. And then last thing is that if the mayor thinks that the council approval is inappropriate, he can veto the council, which I think has happened once or twice in the 30 years. But the mayor does have the option to veto, and then the city council can come back and override the veto. So that's a special permit. I'll take your questions. The one other thing I do want to add about this is that, obviously one of the concerns we have are homeless families and siting of homeless families. And today in the M1 districts, homeless services will locate homeless facilities as temporary facilities to house the homeless. And this is obviously somewhat controversial, but we're under a court order to house homeless families and homeless people. And so what this text would do is that if the facility is being used for a public purpose, it would then be, they would not be subject to a special permit. It would be, they would be allowed to proceed as a right. A commercial hotel would require a special permit. A public purpose hotel, generally run by a nonprofit, would not. So I'll take questions from there.
Would those be subject to fair share?
No, because generally speaking, they would not be public facilities. There would be facilities run by a nonprofit, and fair share is for public facilities.
Community Board 4, that was one of my major concerns, the not-for-profit, because we felt that the not-for-profits would not be able financially, resourcefully, be able to go through the ULURP and spend all that time and money. So you're saying a not-for-profit running a facility then would not have to do that?
Correct.
Okay, I want to get that clear.
Well, our concern at Community Board 11 is based on what was read, members of our land use committee were concerned that the city, which is what you just mentioned, exempts itself from the requirements that it's requesting. We at Community Board 11 have a high share of a lot of services that keep being put in our district. We actually even have sanitation services that we share with another district, and that is a concern. So when we voted, we actually said that we would vote yes on this based on the condition that the city does not exempt itself and has to go through the same process.
Okay.
So what is the answer to that?
So the answer is,
We have the same concern.
the answer is that this is about commercial hotels. It's not about the city's homeless policy. And obviously the city's policy towards the homeless, a lot of controversy, a lot of issues. I think in terms of the community boards, elected officials having concerns, those are the types of things that should be dealt with homeless services. And so if Community Board 11 feels that facilities are being created that are inappropriate, that don't work, that are creating problems for the people who are there, I would just say you need to talk to homeless services. If the board doesn't have a contact with homeless services, we can put you in touch with them. They have gone out to many, many communities and explained the policy, explained what they're doing. They're the best ones to really talk about that, not me. I'm not an expert on homeless policy.
No, it's just that if you're saying that they can build it as of right, whether it's the Department of Homeless Services, it's the city, if it's built out of as of right, the community board can weigh in, but it will be done no matter what. And so that's our concern, that the city puts up a standard for private development and then for itself based on the need, not the need of the community, but based on the perceived need of the city. And we have a lot of homeless. We are actually servicing people from all over, and that's how it should be. We shouldn't be having segregationist policies, but that was the position of our board, that the city should not seek to exempt itself from the resolution that it is proposing to put out.
How would you vote?
That's my question. I'm going to call my district manager now. I'm going to step out.
It's a problem. Well, maybe we can amend the resolution to include that.
I see it says approval with conditions, so I'm not sure
Add this
exactly.
one.
Are you, in terms of recognized people for questions, I don't know how you want to.
We do, the reference to the fair share requirements were to address that. One thing we could do is cross out, since fair share only applies to city-owned and operated rather than not-for-profit run. I think the idea here was to try to, in number 2, was to come up with a compromise. The other side of the argument is if you subject these facilities to ULURP, and at the council, great deference is given to the local council member, that you could end up with a situation where every facility gets voted down. We were trying to come up with some compromise here that, the city would have to work with the community boards to ensure that that this doesn't result in an overburden of city-owned, city-operated, or public facility transient hotels in any one area or community district. I don't know how people feel about that.
Our problem is, if it's as of right, we don't even know about it until it's done, or until we see um, trucks and debris and whatnot, construction site. So community boards want to know as it's happening, because we might make suggestions that would actually be beneficial for both the community and the development.
Well, we do get notice of the DHS proposals to open shelters.
We get it, supposedly we get it 30 days before it's open, so that's not enough time to really make changes.
I mean, should we put something in about additional notice for exempted
Yeah,
transient hotels?
yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have two questions. One is what portion of the hotel can be dedicated to homeless people in order to qualify for that exemption?
So going forward, once this were to be adopted, the entire facility would have to be a public purpose facility. You would not be allowed to have commercial hotel without getting a special permit.
Okay. And then let's assume that they are 100% homeless. Then 5 years later, they want to become commercial. They have to apply for the permit too.
Correct.
Okay.
Because we all know places that have been built with the best of intentions that.
Right.
Are we discussing?
Goes both ways.
Are we discussing possible amendments to the Borough Board resolution, or we're just discussing questions for basic hearings?
Either.
After the presentation, I guess?
Well, if people have more questions, otherwise, no, we can move on. I mean, we're sort of doing both
Okay,
since.
yeah, I just wanted, did you want to start?
I don't have questions. I have
That's
comments.
what I'm saying, we're commenting now on the resolution and making suggestions.
You were some of the time.
So no more questions? We want to go on to the discussion on the.
Yes.
Well, there might be questions related to the discussion.
Okay,
Don't go anywhere.
I'll stick around, and so if you have like clarification questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Defer to
Yeah.
on this one.
Okay, I'll comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Board 5 has the largest number of M16, the largest area of M16. And our concern is that basically we feel that if you remove the as of right, and it's a special permit, that it's going to make it easier for property owners to create hardship or say that they have a hardship. And once they do that with BSA and get a variance, there's nothing you can do. And therefore, we feel that it's going to increase the possibility of residential, which we're not looking for in the M16 area. So we just met on this last night, so this hasn't even gone to the full board yet. I don't have a resolution in front of me. What I have, I went to the meeting, so this is what I got from, they did vote. And, if you look at the DEIS, I looked at it last night, at least 4 or 5 times, every time they mention what's going to happen, they say, except Manhattan, except Manhattan, except Manhattan. It's listed there a number of times. And our feeling is if that's the case, then accept Manhattan. If that's not the feeling of the other community boards, then accept CB5, because our major concern is that we don't want to change that area of CB5 and make it eligible more eligible for residential housing. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have schools. We don't have transit to take care of what's going to happen if this turns residential. So unless there is either something to mitigate the concerns that we have, and that's has to be a very clear way of mitigating those concerns, or unless we are exempted from it, we're going to deny it.
Has that been an issue previously, or you're worried that would become an issue with BSA special permits
Has been.
to convert to residential?
I mean, that's the mechanism that we have to prevent it. The mechanism is that they have to really prove hardship, and it's difficult. It's difficult right now, because they can, the answer is, well, you can build a hotel. So now, that's not the answer, so they're going to say, well, we can't do anything, we want to build a residential building.
Additional?
Barry, is that something city planning looked at?
Yeah, we did. So, I mean, the only thing we can say is that, you know, each project that's before the BSA is evaluated individually, and, you know, the developer will make their case. BSA may ask, well, have you considered a hotel and applying for a special permit? The other thing I will say is that the City Planning Commission does have standing before the BSA, and depending on the project, is likely to oppose a residential use in an M1 district. So which the BSA also would look at and review if the City Planning Commission weighed in and said, you know, we're not comfortable with residential use here.
You know, the stated purpose of the goal, of the proposal, is to support the Mayor's Housing New York plan. I mean, that's the goal.
That's it.
So that's, to me, that's the answer. And it's very clear, it's stated in the proposal.
I mean, I know we have had concerns in the past about people seeking, you know, use changes at the BSA when we feel like they should really go through the special permit process for that. And, you know, I'm just, this is the first I'm hearing of the issue. It's hard for me to say, you know.
We'd like to preserve that small area that is kind of enclosed by everything else, that seems to be working, and I hear what the other community boards are saying, but we want to keep that where it is in CB5. We want light manufacturing in CB5. We don't want to change it.
Okay. Terry?
I'd like to speak to the Borough Board's resolution. Obviously, CB2 has had, to your point, a very strong, overwhelming change in Soho and NoHo of our manufacturing districts to residential, mostly just done with sort of a tacit approval rather than going through processes. And so similarly, we are going to attempt to at least defend the zoning that exists. There are three things that I'd like to see, if possible, added to the resolution that we think would be would help us get to where we are, which is supporting with conditions. The first one is on the fifth whereas. The proposed text amendment has a set of findings. There are three. I would like to recommend in the therefore that an additional finding be added to protect and encourage a harmonious balance of uses. Right? So if the harmonious balance of uses is this is a manufacturing, and that's the balance. If the balance of uses is like our mixed-use district, residential cheek by jowl with manufacturing and commercial and all the other things, but basically seeking to put a finding that protects the character of the neighborhood as exists, that this could overwhelm. So that's one.
Okay, what's your suggested language, Terry?
An additional finding is added to protect the uses consistent with the character of the neighborhood. I mean, CB2's language says an additional finding is added to protect and encourage a harmonious balance of uses, but of course we relate it to ours, consistent with the mixed-use character of us. But you could maybe enlarge that to just say an additional finding is added to protect the uses consistent with the character of the neighborhood.
Would you be willing to add just a little and prevent hotel concentration?
I think that is in here, but yeah. Is there, well, you guys wrote this one and it's new to me, but that should be.
Is that phrase in there already? I didn't catch it.
Oversaturation, yeah, therefore, number 1. Findings be strengthened so situations in which hotel use or oversaturation
Okay.
presents a conflict. I knew I saw that someplace. So
We
that's
tried to
fine.
get at that.
But I'd like to put that also,
Okay.
you know, about the character, preserving
Yes.
the character of the neighborhood
That's important.
needs to be stronger. And I think that speaks also to the points made. 2, we'd like that the text change specifically allow city planning to prescribe appropriate additional conditions, right? We go there and they say, our hands are tied, we can't just tell them, you can't have eating and drinking on a quiet, small residential street that we're building a hotel in, and of course the hotel wants to have a big front
I
restaurant.
thought that was in the text.
I didn't see it, and my committee did not see it, but can that be
Barry?
verified?
Yeah.
Where did you?
Oh, why are you sitting? Just sit down.
Is the ability?
I don't want to, like, you know, overstay my welcome.
Is the ability, you can sit if you want.
Or you can
Thanks.
get your steps in, either way.
Okay.
I thought but I may be wrong. Is the ability for them
To prescribe additional conditions.
in there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I
And
thought.
I think, you know, the concern that communities have about, oh, you're going to have a large restaurant, you're going to have a rooftop restaurant, all those types of things, well, presumably will come up in the special permit review. And clearly, the planning commission has the ability to set a condition that says, you know, you can't have a restaurant, or the restaurant can only be like a breakfast room, whatever is appropriate, and that can be a condition of the approval.
We were just seeking to make it specific in there that the ability to prescribe additional conditions be affirmatively allowed.
Yes.
So that's about, and then 3 is my big one. And
Guys.
look, all these chairs are like, excuse me, would everybody please calm down? Okay. So at times, a new condition or a new category can be used by the developers to say, well, we got the special permit for a hotel. Therefore, you know, we don't have to go for a special permit for retail above the amount of 10,000 square feet in an M15B district or some such. So we'd like to affirmatively state that any text amendment requiring a special permit will not supersede the requirement for any other special permit that may otherwise be applicable. When they're doing ULURP, they can apply for multiple permits at the same time, so this is not onerous. But we easily envision we got this hotel special permit, and therefore our bottom 5 floors can be a flagship retail because our lobby's not going to be on the ground floor anyway, so 2nd floor, 5th floor doesn't matter. And we can have enormous retail or eating and drinking, whatever it is. So we just want to affirmatively state that the special permit will not supersede the requirement for any other special permit that may otherwise be applicable.
So we had lots and lots of discussions about this, and our conclusion is, in terms of the ground floor retail restrictions, which are unique to Soho and NoHo, since it's a different permit that has a very different requirement, that permit would remain in effect, and so you would indeed have to get both permits. There's some other use permits, 74711, which is a landmark district permit, and the feeling there is that if someone is applying for a use, a hotel use, and we're approving it through either the special permit that is for M1, or they're coming in for a landmark special permit, they're applying for a special permit, they're telling us about exactly what the use is, we're reviewing it for the use, everyone knows it's a hotel because they have to state it. In that case, it would be redundant to have people see 2 special permits essentially for the same thing. So if it's a very specific use permit, 74-711, which is the historic use permit, if someone applies for that, then they wouldn't need the hotel special permit, is where our thinking
And
is.
so it would wipe out. So we'd like to ask the redundancy was all in one application anyway, so it would simply be an additional action related. 74-711, 4214 with 74-781 as the cure for it, and we get that a lot. And 74-922, of course. Those are three that we see a lot, and we would not want to see swept away as redundant. So therefore, my request remains, would not supersede the requirement for any other special permit that might otherwise be applicable. That, I think, is a small change to just in addition to the resolution to strengthen the board's positions.
It doesn't really apply to CBA. We have very small M1 space, but in listening to all of the comments here, I have a question. How much around the city, how much of the M1 area is already being constructed for hotels, and will that have an impact on whether the special permit that's required is more easily given because now the area has been infiltrated by more hotels?
Neighborhood character has changed.
If they're already, as of right, and they're going up, it is changing the character of the neighborhood. And then I also have a comment about number 3 in the therefores, where it says that if this risk becomes evident of supersaturation, it should be evident to community boards, for one, not just with, there's no clarity about to whom it would be evident, and that it be considered, be given a time frame, so that there's a time period where expanding that special permit area would be considered, so it's not just out there for an indefinite period, if that's at all clear, which I'm looking at your expression and I'm thinking it's not. Well, just so that if the risk becomes evident and if the risk of supersaturation becomes evident, that it be considered and acted upon within a certain period of time, so that there is input, so that things happen if it's necessary, again, without things going up as of right and changing and making it less likely that any restriction would be implemented. If that's any clearer, I don't know that it is.
And become evident to whom?
And evident to whom, including among community boards.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is, we spend a lot of time trying to work with the findings. And what our thinking was that rather than being very, very prescriptive, was to be sort of broad, so that issues, like community-wide issues, and you can sort of argue whether it's the right approach or not, but the notion was that community-wide issues could be sort of brought into the discussion. So one of the things we were thinking about is, say someone wants to build a hotel and they want to put it on a particular block, and they basically are able to say, well, the block, it makes perfect sense on the block. But then the sort of thinking was, well, yeah, but like a block away, 2 blocks away is a very intact residential neighborhood, and this is going to totally impact that residential neighborhood. So maybe the project is way too big, or maybe it's not appropriate at all. And so the idea was to provide enough flexibility so that you could come in and you could say, well, yeah, they're right, this block is fine for a hotel, but right in back of it there is a very good residential block, and it's going to totally change the character of the block. So we were trying to basically allow as much flexibility as possible in the review of the special permit. That was our thinking.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just asking about the risk becoming evident, so that community boards continue to have input into this process, and whether hotels are appropriate for the particular neighborhood.
It becomes evident to whom and for how long?
It's sort of like we're looking at the M1 district, whether our hotels are appropriate in the broader neighborhood. That's a whole
It doesn't have to, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant that if the risk of too many hotels in an area, changing the character.
Well, just to be clear, number 3 is about areas that will remain as of right for hotels.
But it's also about, right, but it's also about recognizing that at some point, maybe there are too many hotels in a specific area. I just
Right,
want
that
to
there's
ensure
sort of a
that,
spillover effect. that
Exactly.
If you start requiring a special permit in certain areas, that the hotels will then start clustering
Right.
around there. And I mean, I think I'm fine including, I think we're fine including community boards. I think, we could add promptly consider. I think
Yeah,
it's,
that's-
it's hard to put in some kind of, I mean, 30, within 30 days,
I understand that. We have other issues with builders and their ability to navigate loopholes, create loopholes even. And so now my perspective on anything involving construction is all about what potential builders want to do
I mean,
and the loopholes.
We, for example, when we have the use changes in community board 2, or the, we see, JLWQA, or the good faith marketing. We see one and we're a little uneasy. Then a few months later we get a second one, we write something about it in our recommendation. Then by the time the third or the fourth one comes, we start demanding that something, it sort of usually works in a progressive way like that. But if you're okay with adding the word promptly, I think that's
I don't want to take up more
reasonable
time on this particular issue, just to ensure again that we have, at the most local level, input. Thank you, Nilsa. Nilsa was next.
As I mentioned prior, before the discussion started, or as the discussion started, the position of Community Board 11 is yes, with the condition that the city should not exempt itself from the requirements of the proposed amendment, and I'd like to propose an amendment to this resolution to include that language.
Can you give me 1 minute? I just want to, I want to talk for a second. I think we'll entertain it, obviously, but.
We vote no.
So there's a motion on the table to include an amendment that would require transient hotels for public use, shelters, to go through essentially the ULURP process. And I had expressed the concern before that, with the deference that the local council members are given, with, pressure, that could end up in a situation where virtually all of those facilities, or very many of those facilities, are denied. Do we have?
That's in terms of the M1 district. We're not talking about all, we're talking about the M1 district. We have transient hotels, we have shelters within our board. This is an M1 text amendment. We are talking about the city not exempting itself, as opposed to what is labeling out and what is outlining for the M1 text amendment.
Specifically outside of the M1 district, are you?
Specific to this,
Okay.
specific to this.
Then my question is, in number 2, it says that the city work with community boards. What does that, that's very, nebulous. Can we define that to address?
Well, I think one of the refinements we could make, and again, let's have an open discussion of this. I'd like to hear from the council members too, if they want to chime in. That, we increase the amount of notice, that we put in a condition to increase the amount of notice when there is going to be a shelter that would be exempt.
Yeah.
So, and we could say, notice to community boards, local electeds, that's, you know, that's one option. We can, you know, we can consider other things. You know, all these options are on the table, so, you know, let's.
Could you consider
Community Board
excluding
four.
Board 5?
What?
Could you consider an amendment to exclude Board 5?
Well, I mean, of course, we're gonna consider it. I mean, we've never had an amendment before to exclude a board from a city, you know, and that does sort of set a bit of a
There's always a
slippery
first
slope.
for everything.
And the Community Board 4 already has passed a resolution on
Yes.
this. And in our resolution, we specifically said, we do not want not-for-profits to go through the ULURP special permit process. So I don't know if I could support this.
Is there another way to ensure review that is more meaningful than we're telling you what you're going to get? Is there something that I've never seen between a full ULURP
Right.
and specifically for not-for-profits in the fair share shelter, where there's some degree of teeth, but perhaps it's not
So an
the full
enhanced,
7 months.
an enhanced
Review
public notice
with something,
input period
something
for
more than,
exempt
we'll tell you
facilities.
sooner that you're getting this, and you've got no voice. I mean, what we're seeking isn't to make it onerous to put shelters in, we're seeking, though, to have input. Input that is meaningful and can modify the results. So if ULURP is onerous, per Bert's comments, but not having the ability to weigh in, can we be a little creative and out of the box? Is there some review process that does give our council member, and our community boards especially, a voice in right sizing, in location determination, in all of the things, but doesn't mean that a not-for-profit can't house anybody anywhere in the city.
Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe it could be kind of a special permit light, and it could be.
Or a ULURP-like, special permit heavy.
It could be just a finding from the board president that there is no oversaturation and no, and there is fair share. And so you could have two findings by the borough president that those two things, and then that's for that.
And the borough president would be advised by the community board.
Obviously.
We do
but-
that.
So that would be at the level of the borough president, just for those two specific things.
Compromise.
I think Jim's just developing the language.
Input from city planning
The
on?
writing is.
Trying to
Yeah,
jot it down.
you know, these are concerns that should be addressed by homeless services. And again, if you want to work out a system, it's not up to city planning to work out the system. It's up to, I guess, elected officials and community boards to work out what is a better process if you're concerned that the process isn't working.
The point is, anything that's vague will be used by a developer
Right.
to say, it does not
Absolutely.
prohibit this, therefore we are allowed. We've all seen this.
How about something along these lines, that the city develop in conjunction with the community boards and local electeds an enhanced and stronger public notice and input process for those public purpose transient hotels that would otherwise be exempt from the special permit requirement?
Then we can work it out.
What quite does that mean?
I'm not sure what it means, that's my, I'm
I
not sure.
think additional notice and a.
Well, the notice I
and
get,
input.
but the input is so vague, so they come to the community board says this location's good, this location's not good.
Then what?
Then what?
Then
You
they do
know,
what they want.
and then they say, well, we
Because it's
want
the
this.
city.
We're sorry you don't like this location, but according to this, we can build this here, so we're gonna build this here.
Can it say approval versus input?
Yeah.
City, community boards and city council,
I mean,
somehow say,
then you're back
Yeah.
to ULURP.
So you look at shelters.
I'd love to hear from the council members.
Is,
if
is,
they
the,
have
is the concern right
thoughts.
now, or is it maybe it's both? Is it converting hotels to full shelters, or is it converting, or is it the use of them to commercial hotels as sort of mixed hotel and housing?
Our concern, Community Board
Yeah.
4, our concern was that we felt a not-for-profit wouldn't have the financial resources to go through the whole ULURP process.
Oh.
And it would be detrimental. So maybe something like, now I don't know functionally what a light ULURP would look like.
Right.
You know, does that mean they don't have to spend half the money? I mean, I don't know.
Oh, so
Only
like
half the
the
lawyers?
ones who want it.
I don't know.
In other words, right now, public purpose transient hotels are exempt from the special permit requirement.
To build them.
Some of the some of the boards want them not to be exempt. So, but I raised concerns that that could result in, you know, those, you know, pressure not to build those.
In light of the fact
and-
that fair share is not considered, which was which was my understanding, in light that some of our community boards have heavy M1, right? And in light that the city, regardless of its Department of Homeless Services, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mechanism for approval of a site. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter. In East Harlem, and I think Diana Ayala, our honorable council person, can speak to it, we have an oversaturation of a lot of different services, not just shelters, not just, we do. So I'm not arguing because Community Board 11 has the heavy M1 district. That's not what I'm arguing about. Our board took the position that it is only fair that if we are doing a resolution where certain people have to abide, that we understand, but that we as well need to hold the city accountable. If this is not going to be accountable through fair share because we're exempt, then where does the community board hold the city to a standard when something just pops up in their district as of right? That's the question, and that's why the condition was, according to what was approved, that the city should not exempt itself from the requirement of the proposed amendment.
I think we've been having these discussions with DHS as of late in terms of fair share distribution. The problem is that this is a double-edged sword, because you know, if you go to the left too much, you know, then you give too much discretion to the community to decide that they don't want any shelters. And this is what's happening already without a law, without any, you know, policies in place. And so communities like ours end up oversaturated because nobody else wants them. And so we've been having these discussions already internally, and I think that, you know, there will be some change, but there will be a distribution of shelters so that every community will be impacted. So it's the language is important here, because you don't want to, you know, I think this is really left, it should be left to city council to kind of figure it out. But you know, I have concerns. I mean, Keith brought up a good point. In the South Bronx part of my district, we have a lot of hotels that, you know, are just popping up in residential communities where they make absolutely no sense to me as a, you know, from a business perspective, to put a hotel, and then they automatically become shelters. So you know, there's a lot that can be said here. This is a very complex issue.
Can I ask a question? So do we expect the nonprofits to be on city-owned land, or we think they're actually going to acquire land on the open market?
Yes.
They're going to acquire land, or both.
You think they're going to acquire land on the open market, like market rate in Manhattan?
With citizens.
I think that the answer is they're going to acquire land wherever they can get it and can afford it. And there is, even in shelters, there is money. And sometimes there's money after it's been a shelter, sometimes during. And as I said, I think we're going in the right direction. But what we're seeking is for the community boards, that's our job, to have meaningful input, not just You know, we know about it, we told them why we think it's right or wrong, or should be bigger, smaller, sideways, should or should not be on this land or that. I mean, in our district, public land is, there just isn't. We're seeking to have meaningful input because we know our communities. And so the input is good, but it has no teeth. So then we tell them, this should be 2 floors smaller, but it should have 6 more, whatever. And they say, thank you for your input.
And they go.
We're not required to follow it. Bye-bye. So I think you're going in the right direction. I think I hear Bert's point, and I hear the point of it's easy to just say, oh gosh, no. Is there a mechanism? And I don't know if the council has a mechanism that gives the local community more of a voice, but without requiring something that might be onerous or prevent the shelter from ever happening anywhere.
I mean, the issue is, to Terry's point, or at least the way I see it, is how do we define input, right? Do they come, go through the motions, and then leave and say input has been there, or through, like, say, like the ULUP process where our input is by resolution? So is there something where we can put in, and resolutions are all still advisory, right? So, I mean, teeth is what we're missing, you know? We probably would love a set of teeth, right, in this whole process. So would it be something where the input is community board resolutions on certain matters will be considered, or so that it triggers some sort of quasi-process that looks like a process, where the input isn't just a presentation? Where folks could very well phone it in, send like a rep, or do we have a mechanism that puts into place where projects come in, we evaluate it in the same fashion, and put out a resolution to whoever it is has to make that decision? Whether it's your office, city council, our local member.
Well,
I think what we are all, reacting to is what's been going on with the city putting in shelters and turning regular commercial hotels into shelters in many of our districts. And I think that the purpose of this was to have a full review. And for me personally is that this will give the council member and the city council a strong voice on this. Because if it doesn't go through ULURP, we don't have any input at all. And it would go through the ULURP process. That's where everyone will have a say. Because if they just use that, it's a public purpose, but public purpose also have impact on the community. We gotta find a way to have a say.
There you go.
But I think
Thank you.
but I'm just gonna maybe say something that's popular here, which is that I don't think you can put homeless shelters, I'm just gonna say homeless, into the ULURP process. If that's what's being discussed right now.
No.
I think you can put hotels into them, and if their concern is around conversions of commercial hotels or the proliferation of hotels that will be converted wholly, then this is a process by which you can review them up front in certain parts of Manhattan or the city to say whether, and then you can talk about those fears about what the usage will be. If the question is whether you should be looking at whether nonprofits or shelters or housing should be part of the ULURP process, I think that's, I think there are a lot of things to do by notification with DHS and public notice. I think you will be doing something that could be very harmful to the city of New York.
Good. Go ahead. Mark. I was going to ask Barry, because this has gotten into the realm of homeless policy, which is not my area.
Nor mine.
Are all shelters transient hotels? Are some transient hotels and some not? Like, I don't know where the line is. So.
No. If you're in an M1 district, it has to be a transient facility. It's like transitional housing, where people are there for longer periods of time. Those kind of facilities would be required to be in a district that allows long-term residential occupancy, an R or a C district. In the M1 districts, we're really only talking about facilities that are sort of temporary, sort of emergency housing. Sometimes the emergency lasts for a lot longer than we'd like, but the idea is that this is not going to be a long-term stay because it's not permitted in an M1 district.
So, just, there are, first of all, I agree absolutely with everything that Margaret and Keith just said. In practice, I think there are almost no cases of a nonprofit homeless shelter acquiring a property on the market in a manufacturing district and building a shelter or converting a loft. If someone can point even one case of that, I'd be curious to know. All the cases I know of new shelters opening have been on public land. Obviously, in theory, this could happen. So in theory, it could happen. But any nonprofit that is sophisticated enough to acquire property at market rate and secure the funding to develop a new building or convert a loft, which is almost as difficult, is going to be sophisticated enough to hire a land use attorney to get through the ULURP process. Right? So the argument against just putting nonprofit shelters, sorry, I contradicted myself there. My key point is that I think we're worrying about an eventuality which is extremely rare. Extremely rare. Just based on, if someone can, you have one what? Tell us about that case.
14th Street.
Right.
Next to Salvation Army.
And that was an M1, or how did?
It's not an M1, that's right.
It's not an M1, I know that.
Yeah, it was not M1.
I know that.
But the point is that developers can acquire market rate. That's the point that I was responding.
But it's not an M1.
That's correct. Go on.
It's not an M1, it's not,
Right.
it doesn't fit your scenario.
Right.
Go ahead, Alita, go ahead.
Is it possible to separate the issue of the city-owned or shelter from the rest, from the commercial property for the M1? Because for right now, to vote on this, because it sounds like there's agreement on the commercial uses in M1, and if we're trying to prevent a change in character and too many hotels, and the issue, as Councilmember Ayala, is that correct, pointed out, is very complicated, it would make sense to spend more time trying to formulate a resolution that would take into account the issues raised by the various council members and boards here.
I do think that makes some sense. What we were going to suggest is to sort of, what about, in some sense, dividing it and having a condition that says, as to exempt facilities, the city, the Department of Homeless Services should work with the community boards, the borough president's office, local electeds to come up with a process for input, notice, input, and citing criteria for the exempt shelters.
Well, Community Board
for the exempt facilities.
Community Board 4 would go along with something that would categorize not-for-profits differently than commercial. And if that fits what you're saying, we can then support that.
Okay, so let's try to do that.
It's already in there, isn't it? I thought we already did that.
Doesn't quite say it.
There was, no, because the discussion here was not to do that before.
Well, but that would be reversing what's in here, the discussion. Sorry, I thought we already exempted nonprofit.
No. That we have the resolution that focuses on commercial, and then one of the therefore clauses, one of the conditions be that with regard to exempt transient hotels for public purpose, the city, Department of Homeless Services, city planning, community boards, council, local electeds work together to come up with a process that, whereby those could be cited and in M1 districts.
A ULURP light.
ULURP light. Meaningful review.
Yeah, and you learned
Yeah.
like that, but there was
That's a good word,
input from the
meaningful.
community boards.
That actually somebody has to listen to. and
Meaningful.
someone will
Have to
say,
write
"Yeah,
out
I
what-
like check the box, we went to them.
Someone would have to write out what exactly that process is.
Dawn's
Well,
comment
That's what
about-
they're saying, is that that process needs to be.
Dawn's comment about specifically having a resolution,
Hold on a second. I think it's a good point we have several edits, right? Several amendments.
A lot,
that-
yeah.
A lot of votes.
So,
to vote on today.
Do we have 5 minutes to give me to put these in some kind of order?
Who has to,
I have to
who
go.
has to go?
I'm leaving in 5 minutes.
What's the problem?
Okay,
I have to go.
Can we vote on it and then?
well,
As amended.
yeah, let's go through
Well,
quickly.
briefly, just
And
go
you
over
guys
some-
tell me if I missed anything.
Right.
Okay, so, page 1 will remain the same.
No, you're just gonna have in harmonious balance of uses. Harmonious balance of uses are.
But that whereas clause is just saying what
What it has,
is
okay,
in
so you put
there.
in
So,
the therefore.
so, right,
Okay.
so page 1 will remain the same. Page 2, the whereas clause that's bracketed, we're just gonna take out because we're not gonna screw around with that.
So,
So then, I think the next change will be to the whereas clauses. So we will have that the findings be strengthened that situations in which hotel use or oversaturation of hotels presents a conflict with existing uses is considered regardless of potential mitigation. 2, that the city develop in, oh no, wait, I'm sorry.
it's therefore one.
That, and then we have CB2's suggestion that the requirements affirm that the special permit not supersede the requirements for other special permits that might otherwise be applicable.
Yeah. So that's therefore.
I'm sorry, let's go back to 1. 1, that the findings be strengthened that situations in which hotel use or oversaturation of hotels presents a conflict with existing uses, it's considered regardless of potential mitigation, and that the findings include a finding to protect uses consistent with character of the neighborhood. So that's number 1. 2, that the requirements affirm that the special permits not supersede the requirements for other special permits that might otherwise be applicable. 3, that DCP monitor those areas where hotels will continue to be allowed as of right, especially those in the areas in the vicinity of districts in which a special permit will be required to ensure that they do not become oversaturated with hotels, and if this risk becomes evident to community boards, that extension of the special permit requirement or other zoning regulations related to hotel development be promptly considered. 4, that DCP continue to work with community boards on their board-specific concerns, such as resiliency issues related to hotels and the impacts of special permit requirements on certain specific districts and uses. And then we will add and be it further resolved that in the case of public purpose transient facilities exempt from the special permit requirements. The city, including Department of Homeless Services, Department of City Planning, and local elected.
Community boards.
That's what and local elected and community boards work together to develop a process for meaningful review for development of these facilities in M1 districts.
And not supersede the requirement, you have that.
We did that earlier.
Yeah.
We did that earlier.
That's number
Keep
one.
trying to keep up.
I make one
Can it
more
time
comment.
promptly?
Promptly.
Promptly or timely, something about
I think
time.
we put that in.
Promptly.
That was added to.
Yeah.
Wait,
That was added as well.
I got that.
You did.
get it.
Okay.
Can I make one more comment about preserving in number one, about preserving the character of the neighborhood? I would say prior to the construction of maybe the hotels or a certain number of hotels or something, so that, because this has happened in our area for residential buildings, they build something and then they say, well, look, it's had an impact, and so we could do another one because now it's already changed. So if you're looking at the character, you're looking at the character without the inclusion of the hotels, that would be more emphatic for me, but.
Okay, well, I thought we have oversaturation in one.
Right, but it's not necessarily oversaturation, it's this tilting of, or changing subtly of the character. Every time you put something new in there, it changes it, and I would be concerned about developers coming back and saying, well, look, it's already different, it's not going to make that much more difference. But if you look at it and exclude the impact of the new hotels, you're looking at a purer form that every new thing is going to affect. I don't know, again, if I'm
Is
being
the word
clear.
historic character of the neighborhood, or?
Traditional.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how to write that.
Historic is good, traditional, or,
But that's
Contextual. No, the word one is.
or contextual.
Word in one sentence.
Yeah, because historic,
Yeah, no,
you know,
contextual is
yeah, the
good.
forms would be-
Contextual's good.
That's true, and I would like to see that again.
Okay, so.
Okay, we'll try to find a way to put contextual in there.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to.
True, you're gonna have to.
Quiet.
Sorry, it is true though, after the fourth one goes in, they say this is the character of the neighborhood now.
Yeah.
What about 25?
Original context.
Original context, that's, yeah.
Well,
The
how
original
far you go.
context of the neighborhood.
Fun looking mountains up in
There's castles up there.
I mean, we could put something like at the baseline context of the neighborhood to imply that sort of pre these actions.
Or you could just say free, I don't know what baseline means.
Original context. Original context.
Original context of the neighborhood, I like that better, because character of the neighborhood, they say, hey, we've got 23 stores here, it's commercial now, or we've got 4 hotels, it's hotel now.
But you could say historic or intended. You can't say historic because that has a whole
We
other.
tried that.
You can say intended.
Intended, maybe, yeah.
Intended.
Original, how far back?
Intended is like.
Yeah, the
was
problem with the
intended
word
to
like
be
original
residential
is-
or-
How far back do we go?
1784 was a great year
All right,
for
well,
horse and carriage.
10 years, 10 years.
Can we trust them to come up with language that means?
We'll come up with
Yeah,
language.
I think so.
I think context.
Context is
Let's-
the easiest.
You
let's
get
say-
what we're asking.
What about pre-special permit context of the
Something
neighborhood?
No,
like that.
because some of us already inundated.
I think context, the borough president was correct.
Okay.
Every neighborhood has a
What about
context.
context?
It's context.
And then let the lawyers fight it out.
Then someone else can find what context is.
Okay, okay.
Okay, we get a vote.
I think we're there.
Vicky, are you ready to vote?
Yeah,
Would it be the one with the motion?
If you could indulge me, I wrote this out because none of the electeds nor Gail heard what I had to say.
I did, right here.
Oh, okay, but I'd like to read it, it's very quick. The citywide nature of the proposed text has drastic unintended consequences that must be addressed. This is from last night's meeting. This has not gone to full board, obviously. The major issue is that it will eliminate an as-of-right conforming use for hotels that will make it easier for a property owner to claim and prove hardship. Once hardship is established, the BSA must issue a variance and has no discretion. We would then see an exponential increase in residential development like school overcrowding, population, business, industry displacements, transportation, parks, urban character, etc., in our M16 districts without any mitigation from such development. So the committee voted to deny unless a strong mechanism is put in place to avoid unintended consequences or exclude Community Board 5. Otherwise, I have to deny, I have to vote no.
Okay.
You wouldn't entertain the thought?
Unintended consequences is interesting.
We want to preserve light manufacturing in Board 5. And, you know, we would never say this if we didn't know how other community boards were feeling about this, but we feel that that center part that is excluded from any, you know, the outside residential areas and the waterways and so on, that's where it should be, and it should remain there. And if you want residential for that, then you move it to Queens and Bronx, which is what the DEIS said, excluding Manhattan, they said that. Then move it there and move it to the other community boards if they are so in agreement, which it sounds like they are, and leave us alone.
In our letter, Community Board 4, we use that exact phrase, unintended consequences. We need to be aware of unintended consequences.
Can there be a mechanism to monitor? How about an ongoing monitoring of the situation and protection against unintended consequences?
I mean,
That's benign.
that's benign, but I don't know if that's enough for.
I don't know, but it's an interesting thought that we might consider reversing.
What if you just address residential as a separate category and specifically exempt or refer or have a mechanism or something, because I would completely agree that the manufacturing should be preserved, or even a reference to preserving these districts as as manufacturing districts without impact of additional residential properties or something. I don't know how that works, but.
Could we?
Would that be?
The problem is, we can't put it as a finding, because what Vicky's talking about is a BSA, a hardship case. Is there, is there a mechanism for, like, is not wanting to go through a special permit process a reason for a BSA hardship? I mean, is there something we can, I know the BSA is it's to some extent a creature of state law, that we're required to have a BSA for hardship appeals. But is there a way to, that city planning would weigh in at each of these, that refusal to go through the special permit process is not a hardship?
I don't think so.
Well, the BSA, in terms of the process, they can't require someone to apply for discretionary action. They certainly can ask, well, have you considered a hotel, and why do you think a hotel would not work at this location? But then they have to evaluate it based upon what the developer's saying. As I said before, the City Planning Commission has standing before the BSA, and in the past has opposed variances for residential use in M1 districts, which is not to say we're going to guarantee to oppose it, but the history is pretty much that City Planning has weighed in often on projects which they thought were inappropriate.
What if we said that we call on city planning to oppose residential variances in this area of CV5?
Is it totally out of the realm of possibility for, I know this is unusual, but if every community board, and I'm not sure, it sounds to me like most of all who have spoken agree that it should be kept in Board 5, then why not exempt Board 5? Why not do something a little unusual that makes sense that everyone agrees to? What do we have to lose? Then I can vote yes on everything else, and or maybe I shouldn't vote if we're exempt, I don't know, I guess I should vote, yeah.
Wait, Christine, what was your suggestion for?
Could you have a finding,
Jim?
could you have a finding in number 2 which says your text and then plus contrary to the intent of the special district? Because these are in special districts, and therefore if the intent is to keep manufacturing, obviously it would be contrary to the intent of the special district.
So the area in Community Board 5 you're talking about, Vicki, is a special district?
Yeah.
Yes.
So. Because in the special district you have a whole description of what, and then you could say if it's contrary to the intent of the special district, then you would use that word. In the finding, finding number 2.
So exempting the applicability of this to
Well, doing it as a test.
M1 special districts where it's contrary to the intent of the special
Right.
district, does that affect any other?
Yeah, I think so.
In Manhattan, though.
Manhattan, yeah.
Where?
I'm thinking parts of Tribeca. Let's see.
Yeah, 158
Parts of
would be-
Clinton Special District.
Hudson Square Special District.
Yeah, but that would
It's a
be,
special permit situation
Yeah.
for hotels.
but that would be specific to the intent of the special district, you know, if the special district is intended to protect manufacturing.
Well, that's true of the other districts too, not to say that it's not the right thing to do.
But your concern is more than the garment district. You're concerned
No.
about the area between 5th and 6th, which is not a special district, it's just a straight M16 district.
But the other part is,
Right, no, but it would, just having special districts would impact parts of Ward 5, might impact other parts where there's no intention to impact, and then not serve areas of concern to Ward 5. So I don't know that
that
works.
may not work. It would make it difficult to, we had a deny unless, so it's very hard to vote yes on a resolution that's an approval with conditions when we have a
Exactly.
deny. The only way I could is if we did that, and let's get creative.
Is there some way we can write it that does satisfy just your situation?
Our wording was deny unless a strong mechanism is in place. That would change the whole resolution, which is an approval with conditions. It's different.
We should
You're just a committee, you haven't even had full.
Yeah.
board.
Yes,
You
we
have
have
to go. I mean,
People
I'm
have to
waiting.
leave.
We vote, so we don't vote.
Yeah, that's a big meeting, I don't know that we can come up with something now, we can try to do an amendment, I don't know. Anything we can add?
I think the intent of the special district is sort of a good thing to strengthen this anyway. And if Vicki can't vote yes because her committee didn't, then, the key is to get this as strong as possible.
So we could ask city planning to strongly consider how this should be applicable to special districts where the intent of the special district is to preserve manufacturing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. It doesn't help you a lot, Vicki.
No, but
It helps. It helps.
yeah, exactly.
But at least it'll be in
Yeah.
here, even if you vote
Yeah.
no and it
Yeah,
helps
strongly
order.
consider.
It'll be there.
Be it further resolved that city planning
Strongly consider.
should strongly consider the applicability of the requirements to special districts.
I'll take out the word special.
Where the intent was to preserve manufacturing. That, I mean,
Take out special.
but that's every M1 district.
Well, yeah.
But then, I
Okay,
mean,
never
come
mind. I'm
on.
sorry.
Could you add with recommendations from the affected community board? Could we strongly consider with a recommendation?
I mean, I think that's implied.
Okay.
But in West Chelsea, in Ward 4, where you have areas zoned M15, where the proposal today says there will be a special permit for new hotels. What are you asking us? You are asking us to not have a special permit
I
there?
mean, that's, the problem is this language then is every district.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
you have to tell us what you want.
Chair meeting at 11.
Well, strongly consider doesn't mean, let's hold on one second, because we're almost done. Strongly consider doesn't mean that you have to, it just means consider.
Consider not having a special permit there? I mean, what are you asking us to look at?
We want manufacturing and not hotels.
Well,
I
okay,
agree.
so that's what it does, so why are we looking at it? I'm not.
I mean, that's the, it sort of undercuts the entire.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes or no?
Let's just vote.
Let's
I
vote.
mean,
Let's vote.
Yeah, I think we have to vote.
Are we doing it with or without this?
I think it has to be without, it undercuts the sort of basis of the resolution.
Yep.
Okay, so the changes without changes to address Community Board 5.
Can't say I didn't try.
Very well, you tried very bad.
Vicky, I vouch for you.
Call the roll.
Call the roll. Community Board 1?
Yes.
Community Board 2?
Yes.
Community Board 3?
Yes.
Community Board 4?
Yes.
Community Board 5?
No.
Community Board 6?
Yes.
Community Board 7?
Yes.
Community Board 8?
Yes.
Community Board 9?
Yes.
Community Board 10?
No.
Community Board 11?
Yes.
Community Board 12?
Yes.
Councilmember Ayala? Councilmember Chin?
Yes.
Councilmember Levine?
Yes.
Councilmember Powers? Councilmember Rivera?
Yes.
Borough President Brewer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It's always really interesting.
Goodbye, my fellow. Keep up the good fight and we'll get them next time.
We have a presentation now, everyone. So if you have to leave.
We got presentation.
Out of the whole process.
Jessica, close the doors.
Yeah, well, they gotta, thank you very much.
All right, next we have Where We Live, Fair Housing Together, a presentation by Housing Preservation and Development. Michael Sandler, did you have your colleagues here with you?
I think they're just gonna hang out. We just have.
Jim, with Jim.
It makes sense. Anybody sticking around?
I think we might want to do it the next time. I'm not gonna say
Okay. All right, we're having a 1-minute break, so everyone's getting their coffee. We're gonna sit back down. And then we just have one quick announcement also, is whoever's here. Excellent, is there some people still here? Good. Noel just needs to make a quick announcement.
Yeah, tomorrow after, after tomorrow morning's meeting, Beta NYC and the Community Planning Fellows are going to be doing a presentation on projects and tools for community boards. So it's going to be in this room from 11:30 till 1:30, and we're going to buy people lunch. So if you're interested, essentially come tomorrow at 11:30 to 1:30.
All right,
So
we're gonna, to be respectful of everyone's time, We're gonna change the agenda if no one minds, and we're just gonna have a quick, 2 or 3 minutes. I think Christine Berthet wanted to mention something for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go to the community board report outs for those community boards who have been able to stay.
And you're going?
No, next month.
You're gonna go next month?
Yeah, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Yes. No, so you want to come back in July? Okay, actually, so, everyone, community boards, those community boards who have remained, if you want to do a quick community board report out?
Okay. Yeah, okay, it's just me, I guess.
Community board 1, 3, and 8.
8.
And I'm here on behalf. Okay, and 9. Okay, you can be.
Okay. Well, in Community Board 8.
Everyone, please, if we got everyone's attention.
Terry's still here. In Community Board 8, we still have the issue of zoning on the avenue.
Everyone, please. We have community board chair reports.
Community Board 8, we still have the issue of zoning or no zoning on avenues 3rd and east of there up till East End. That the developers coming in, manipulating and using loopholes and building huge buildings, so-called as of right. So we're trying to get some zoning with the board passed a resolution last year or the year before of a 210-foot height limit, and we're working on that. We have concerns about transportation, infrastructure, and I know that there was something else. I will come back to amend if given permission to. But that's been what's been occupied. Oh, I have questions and would like to institute more transparency and conflicts of interest, and would like to maybe talk to people from the Borough President's office about that, because I know that there's the disclose, discuss, don't vote, but I'm not sure what that applies to. And there are people, I think, who are, and this is not made public to my knowledge, members of advocacy groups who don't necessarily disclose that, or people who are connected in some way to resolutions or to applications. And I would like I'd like there to be more disclosure and more transparency. So some of the issues we're confronting are for me, are the conflicts of interest, and also we're posting resolutions between the committee vote and the full board vote, which we hadn't done before, and we're posting a take action as drafts with disclaimer language that 3 attorneys weighed in on, so that the public understands that they're not accepted by the board or voted on by the board. And then we're putting on a take action, so that for issues of urgent importance, the public is told if they'd like to, who to call or who to contact or who to write letters to in city agencies, city council members, state representatives, on issues that have an immediate impact on the community, or for whom there needs to be an immediate response. So those are the big things right
Thank you. And we're going to have a community board leadership training series launched again.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure that we'll have a robust conflicts of interest and do it even a little differently. Vicky?
Oh.
CB5?
Okay, hold on, let me get it out. I didn't think you were going to get to me. I'll read it so it goes very quickly. We did our resolution on the L train shutdown. I know everybody else has done it, but I just wanted to mention that we came up with what we call 7 core guiding principles with explanations about each. So I'll just quickly mention what the 7 are. And there's information on what exactly the details are of each of the core principles. But number 1 is the plan should be equitable and balanced. Number 2 is the plan should focus on enforcement and safety. And this all goes into, like bicycle cars, trucks on 14th Street. The plan should ensure unimpeded and safe movement of fire, law enforcement, and other first responders. The plan should be flexible. The plan should maximize quality of life. It should provide sufficient ADA access, and it should embrace communication and welcome feedback. And the last part is that it should be temporary and transparent. I gave Brian the information on the details of each of the core principles, if anybody wants it. We then passed a series of 16 resolves addressing specific examples for the 7 core principles, like requesting a formal plan, the creation of a designated pickup and drop-off points, increased resources for sanitation services, strict enforcement of traffic regs, and so on. The second thing that I was just going to mention is that we had a request for a special permit to modify allowable bulk regulations to facilitate construction in a new mixed-use building and to allow an automated accessory parking facility with a maximum of 23 spaces at 110 East 16th Street. And the reason why this was very complicated and problematic is because the applicant claims that there is no increase in FAR, but since it's a modification of the allowable bulk, mandatory inclusionary housing will not automatically be triggered, and we really have a problem with that. So for this and a number of other reasons, like the building would alter the character of the block, alterations would result in an additional 58,000 square feet of residential floor area, which far exceeds what is labeled as significant increase, that they say, the threshold established in the zoning code. So we disagreed, and we voted to deny the application. And then, of course, we had our meeting last night on M1 and on the Garment Center. That's and we did pass a resolution on the Garment Center as well as on the M1. We are denying the Garment Center with, it hasn't gone to the full board, obviously. It's being denied with unlesses.
Thank you.
Okay?
Roberta?
Sorry.
Thank you. Roberta? CB7?
We had a resolution on immigration, on not letting, it hasn't gone to full board yet, but once it passes, I'll send it to everybody on the whole business with children being forcibly removed from their parents. The fourth of our NYCHA forums with CB9 is going to be this Saturday. Getting people there was like pulling teeth. We planned the forum 6 months ago and neglected to realize that it was the weekend before July 4th, which falls on Wednesday. So it's going to be a very informal forum. We are going to meet with folks from NYCHA to plan an event for the fall. So we're just using it as we have flyers all over the place, so we couldn't call it off. So it's going to be whatever it is, but it will be cozy and intimate. We're working on the new, with the police. The captain of the 20th is just phenomenal. And he's starting a neighborhood policing program in 2 weeks, which will be very exciting. And we have the new members handbook is out, and we will have our assistant DM arrange to get copies to everybody.
Thank you. CB3?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's been a while since I've been here. Okay, so CB3 is always having so many things that we're doing. We're buzzing around. But no one is talking about this $43,000 that was given to the community boards and the stipulations on how to spend it. So we're very concerned about that. You know, and does anyone have any suggestions on how they're going to spend their money? That's what I need to know. So we also passed a resolution for the census. I gave everyone a copy. Would you like a copy?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you. And so we're just getting prepared ahead of time what's going to happen, because we know that this census is going to mean so much to so many, and it's frightening because I think that a lot of people are not going to answer the census because of the current events. So tonight we have a transportation event that's happening at 301 Henry Street at 6:30 p.m. Transportation is becoming a big issue in our district because of the getting prepared for the L train. We have all the new developments that is going up on Essex Crossing, and so forth and so on. Now Target and Trader Joe's are going to open up on Grand Street, and so that creates a whole nother nightmare of traffic issues, because that is directly a street that is leading towards the bridge. And we have a lot of senior residents that are in that particular area. So we're very concerned about that. We're just looking for ways to solve our traffic issues right now in that tiny little streets that we have on the Lower East Side. And lastly, we're working on our webpage. So we just started reviewing our webpage and, oh, no, not lastly, I have another thing. The application, oh my gosh, for these 3 towers on the waterfront that are being proposed. So my summer is going to be spent in reading thousands of pages, documents. My whole board is going to be on board to review this document, and the borough presidents with her help and the council members' assistance as well. So, thank you.
Thank you for the update. Community report. Terry?
I'll do abbreviated. There's, of course, much angst about the L train, not just 14th Street in that area, but also the Kenmare Little Italy loop, which is fed from Delancey. There was a council hearing on that yesterday. One thing to what Alicia just said is looking for support for the two-way toll on the Verrazano. That is federal, but we've even advocated for temporarily suspending it or temporarily going back to two-way, because they've got the high-speed gantries, because that's what's causing a lot of the west-facing traffic that starts in Alicia's and comes through my district. In general board, trying to create a new committee. Right? Our land use committee is responding to an enormous volume of applications, as everybody else is, because development is profitable. But splitting out from that, economic development and small businesses, not just as responding to applications, which is what our land use committee is slammed with every month, but a breakout committee called Economic Development and Small Business. And then that should free up a little bit of extra bandwidth in the land use committee to focus more on not just applications, but also solutions for housing. I think that those two things are important, and I'm hoping that by splitting the committee, that there will be more support for our small businesses and more support for housing while retaining all of the work that our excellent land use committee does. In conjunction with that, also trying to strengthen our social services committee, because whoever thought we would be living in a society where we have to fight for basic human rights. So we're going to try to do it on a hyper-local basis and see how it can push up to the federal.
Thank you. Community Board 1, Anthony?
Yep. That's the highlights. Over a year ago, the mayor's office had these neighborhood support teams they tried to implement, and we have connected with them, and we're working on a project because of the overdevelopment, so much garbage and traffic problems. And it seems to be moving forward. Big issue was still, obviously because of the community here, traffic parking had become a big issue again. It flares up. And the major announcement was Howard Youth Corporation has purchased a full block site adjacent to the seaport area. And the zoning will be a major issue there. And it just started. Other than that, we had our elections Tuesday night, and I'll be here for another 2 years. That's it.
Thank you for that.
Oh, I didn't
Community
announce
Board.
that either.
Community Board 9, Ken?
Just some quick updates on behalf of Padmore. We had almost 200 people attend our HCFC meeting last Tuesday to talk about the counter proposal to the regulatory agreement that HPD wants buildings to sign. In other news, we continue to work with the West 147th Street Block Association to address the opening of a methadone clinic in a residential area. Specifically, that's in regards to the Argus proposed methadone clinic. So there's been a lot of conversation and engagement with that block association over what's going to happen in that space. CB9 board members disapproved the letter of support for the Argus Community Inc. for the development of that space. We continue to work with local, as was mentioned, the upcoming CB7 co-sponsored NYCHA forum, so continuing to get awareness out for that. We continue to work with local stakeholders in our district on addressing the violence continuum from homicide to suicides and the mass incarceration problem, which I know with regards to some of those elements were discussed at the last Borough Board meeting as well, but continuing to, summer's coming and summer is here, and there's just concern in the neighborhood for kind of how we mitigate some of these continuing challenges. In relation to the work with the 125th Street bid, as an advisor to the bid, I know that at a previous meeting, there was a real estate development roundtable in which one of the conversations that arose from that was questions about the adoption of the cultural bonus and kind of where that has, where some developers have been apprehensive to use it. So there's an exploration of kind of how it's actually working in terms of its adoption, and looking, I think one of the challenges as presented from some of the developers that spoke was there's a cap on height restrictions when used in conjunction with the cultural bonus. So as a result, folks are less inclined to use the cultural bonus. So trying to figure out that situation. And then also just continuing separately the Cosmos Initiative, Platform for Advanced Wireless Research, continuing to monitor and that rollout, and continuing to stay abreast with Columbia, our neighbors, around next generation Wi-Fi initiatives.
Thank you. We'll spare you, unless Jessica is itching to make any announcements, we'll spare you any more reports, either from the Borough President or the Councilwoman. Yeah, the announcements are in our June newsletter. Motion to adjourn? All right, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
What happened here?
So they changed our bylaws to reflect the new members not knowing who the executive members were. So they changed the bylaws, and so we have another election in November. So I was elected, no, it's not going to get extended. What they're going to do is have another election.
Yeah, so if you're available.
The mayor's town hall, which I was just appointed after Jake left. So now I gotta get rid of it.